expectation. You know, maybe you saw the car they drove, maybe they're a little bit more body fat than you would like, or maybe they're there's, you know, you create this this idea, you know, and in the pursuit of that idea, maybe you're kind of getting really narrow focused. And so in doing so, I'm just curious, does that actually push more people away? And if that's true, if that does actually push people away, is there a part of you that wants to push people away?
Yeah.
Is there a part of you that's created such an expectation of what you want in a partner that you just know it's not realistic? Some parts of you know it's not realistic. And so therefore, it's easier to do these other things I heard you talk about, which was conquer and possess and own, than to allow someone to come in.
Yes. And I do think it's still important to like be okay with having stipulations around the package, so to speak. Like I may be a little bit, that might sound really superficial, but the thing is I hear women all the time who just say, well, you know, it's not really about that, all the while like kind of wishing that their partner didn't have a beer belly. I mean, so I see what you're saying, but I guess like the more body fat than I would want kind of like triggered something in me of like, well, you know, we do need to be, we can't, like, don't be settling around somebody's like physique, because that's going to eat you up in the end. Because you could be with a really nice person and a lovely human being, but then like be making, oh, well, I guess, you know, I really am not that sexually attracted to them. Like, if you're going to choose somebody that you want to be your life partner with, it's pretty much important that your needs are met as well, if that's the type of partner that you want. So
I think that's a real fine line though, Jules, because I agree with you. You know, I totally understand, and I hear what you're saying, but I also understand that there is a very, very fine line there of, if the person is an A, B, and C, then they absolutely cannot be the right person for
right.
me.
I totally understand.
I have totally understand the idea of having stipulations and having boundaries for yourself.
Yeah.
You know, knowing yourself well enough and being connected to yourself well enough to say, you know, these things are just kind of no-goes, because I understand who I am as an individual, and long-term, that's really not going to work for me, and it's not my place to get in a relationship and try to change this about that person.
Yeah, exactly.
I completely honor that. But I also recognize that in creating this like ideal dream person, there is a piece of that might be setting you up for failure. And so I'm just putting it out there as an invitation of something to explore.
Mm-hmm.
What is your expectation about? You know, is it about creating boundaries because you know yourself, or is it because you're setting yourself up because you're really not ready to be in a relationship, so you're going to keep pushing it away?
Yeah, you're creating like just unrealistic expectations for yourself, or I mean for others even. It's like something that nobody could fulfill.
Right. And I really love the idea, like you said, using the energy around those words of conquer, possess, and own.
Mm-hmm.
Because like we talked about in last week's podcast, the symbolism,
yeah,
and the energy into words,
yeah.
You know, I think that as a society, we don't really honor the power of words, maybe as greatly as I believe that we really should pay attention to that stuff. And so when you use that phrase, letting someone in, that really resonated with me. And I really feel like it's a good segue for us to move into this idea of how it relates to us, that relationship is not a goal, and how it actually, the parallel there in our own personal experience. Is it okay if we shift?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So, because I think it's really important, like I said, that we talk about where we were at as individuals. And so, sticking with this idea of being willing to let someone in, I personally was at a point in my life that I saw it as I had I realized if I was going to ever be in a relationship again, because I was, had been in multiple relationships in my life, and I was actually coming out of one that was ending in a real ugly manner, a few months before you and I, and it's kind of dragging my feet on it for whatever reason. That's a whole different story. But I realized that if I was really going to ever be able to be in a relationship, then I was going to have to just be able to do that. I was going to have to let someone in, meaning I was going to have to be willing to be honest with that individual, with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was going to have a different level of integrity. I think for me anyways, that phrase, letting someone in, there's a certain aspect of integrity that goes with it, like self-integrity.
Yeah, honesty with self is absolutely important, which I think was part of our whole discussion beforehand, was just if somebody is seeking to have a partnership and that's something that you would love to experience in your life, and maybe you've been in relationships that weren't so good, or maybe you haven't had very many relationships at all, and I think that the best way to allow somebody in, to begin opening yourself up for the possibility of genuine partnership is through honesty with self. It's through self-work. And developing a relationship with yourself. And then I feel that we were both kind of at that stage where we'd been working on ourselves. Even in the midst, I was also in a relationship that wasn't so good, right before Billy and I started hanging out. And that was, honestly, that's what got me out of that relationship, was developing an honest relationship with myself, of being brave enough to ask the questions of, am I really happy here? And the answer was no. Nope, I'm not happy at all. And so I worked it was a couple year process really of working through the fear of being alone. And I think that for me, that's where I was at when we met, was I would much rather be alone than be with somebody and be miserable. And that's where I think that idolizing our idolizing relationship can really do us a disservice, kind of thinking that, well, being married to somebody or living with an individual means that I'm not alone. You can experience the most intense loneliness, I think, when you're around individuals who don't understand you, who don't care for you, and who don't really love you, or who you don't really love, or who you don't really feel inspired by, or who you aren't really interested in. That can actually create a really intense level of loneliness. It's almost like you feel the contrast more in the presence of those types of people, and it just magnifies this sense of it magnifies the disconnection that's actually there, and that's a very lonely place to be. So I had learned for myself, man, I'd much rather be alone. I'd much rather be on my own. And alone doesn't necessarily mean that I'm lonely. Mm-hmm. Loneliness, I think, is is really when we cultivate disconnection in relationship or within ourselves, not listening to ourselves, not paying attention to ourselves, not being honest with self, can cultivate a really deep sense of loneliness. Because there's always that part of you that wants to be seen, that wants to be listened to, that wants to be acknowledged and heard. So that's where I was at. Very kind of similar, but maybe a little different.
Yeah, and I definitely, parts of me definitely resonate with that idea that I too was in a space where I made my mind up that I would rather be alone and than with someone who wasn't capable of allowing me to be who I was.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I think, you know, in a lot of my relationships, there were aspects of my partners that I really liked, that I really respect, that I admired, that I was attracted to. And I would find myself justifying being in that relationship based off of those few things, all the while knowing that we were extremely different, all the while knowing that they didn't really value or appreciate all the parts of me. And so when certain parts of me I would go to share it, maybe I would be shamed for sharing that part of myself, or there were certain elements of guilt for, well, if I expose this part of Billy, then the person I'm with isn't going to accept that part. So I have to live that part without my partner.
Yeah.
You know? And so I kind of got to a space where I was definitely prepared to be absolutely alone, because I didn't want to facade anymore. I didn't want to only share parts of myself. I didn't want to, it was a lie. I didn't want to lie anymore. I was tired of lying. I was tired of feeling like, you know, living this sort of limited life. And that's not to put any of that onto the people that I was in a relationship with, because it's no one's fault that you stay in a relationship other than your own. Especially when you know that it's not the right one for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and they don't have to be a bad person.
Right.
For you to need to leave.
That's exactly right.
Does not have to be. Nothing has to go wrong. I mean, but if you're not willing to be honest with how you're feeling about somebody or feeling within a relationship, you know, well, we quickly cultivate misery for ourselves and for our partners when we are not willing to really look at where we're unhappy personally.
Right, and just be honest, just a willingness to be honest. And like I said, you know, I wasn't really living honestly. I wasn't really, you know, being honest with myself. And so moving out of, transitioning out of that relationship into being alone, to hanging out with you, the biggest part of that for me was I committed to myself, I'm going to start being honest. Not just in like the things I share, but living more honestly. And that's a process. You know, obviously I don't think that you just live a certain way for 30 years of your life and you wake up one day and you're like, look at me, I'm Mr. Transparent.
Yeah.
I don't think that's realistic.
No.
But I was ready to like start taking that process on. And in doing so, in developing my character, it made me capable of being where we're at today.
Yeah.
You know, and had I not first developed my character, or I'm not done developing it, had I not began the journey into a new way of being, there's no way you and I could be. It'd be impossible. You know, I know you and I talk about that all the time. And that's a multifaceted process that we can get into over, you know, other podcasts. I don't think we need to dive into all that today. But So for me, if you're out there